At 30,000 feet above hostile territory, a rookie fighter pilot with the lowest hours in her squadron heard a deafening explosion. The cockpit lights flickered red. Her jet spun into chaos. Alarms blaring, and all eyes on the comms went wide with disbelief. The same pilot they'd all doubted, the one they'd quietly mocked for her lack of experience, was now alone, wounded, and fighting to save her aircraft and her entire team's mission. No one could have predicted what she'd do next. If you love stories of courage in the skies, smash that subscribe button and stick around, because what happens next will blow your mind. Now, let me tell you about Maya Brooks. So picture this. You're looking at First Lieutenant Maya Brooks, standing barely 5'4" in her flight suit, and she's about as far from the stereotype of a fighter pilot as you can get. While most of her squadron mates came from military families, their dads were pilots. Their granddads were pilots. Hell, some of them probably had great-granddads who flew biplanes in World War I. Maya was the first person in her entire family to even set foot on a military base. Growing up in small-town Nebraska, Maya's biggest dream was just getting out of there. Her parents ran a hardware store, and the most exciting thing that happened in her town was when the high school football team made it to state championships. But Maya? She was always looking up. As a kid, she'd lie in the cornfields behind her house, watching contrails streak across the sky, wondering what it would feel like to be up there. When she told her parents she wanted to join the Air Force, her mom literally laughed. Not in a mean way, but in that "oh honey, that's nice" way that parents do when their kid says they want to be an astronaut. Her dad was more direct. "Maya, sweetie, people like us don't fly fighter jets." But Maya was stubborn. She studied like her life depended on it, aced every test, crushed every physical requirement, and you know what? She made it. She actually made it through flight school, through all the training, and earned her wings. But here's the thing about the military. Earning your place and proving you belong are two completely different battles. When Maya showed up to her first assignment at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, she was walking into a world where reputation meant everything. These F-16 pilots? They weren't just flying planes, they were flying some of the most sophisticated killing machines ever built. And every single one of them had more combat hours than Maya had total flight time. Her squadron commander, Colonel Martinez, was this legendary pilot who'd flown combat missions in 3 different wars. The guy had shot down enemy aircraft, led bombing runs, and had more decorations on his chest than Maya had shirts in her closet. When he looked at Maya during her first briefing, she could practically see him thinking, "Great, another rookie to babysit." Then there was Captain Viper Johnson. Yeah, they really did use call signs like that. Viper was the squadron's golden boy, the guy everyone wanted to fly with because he had this uncanny ability to get everyone home alive. He'd been flying combat missions for 8 years and had more confirmed kills than anyone wanted to count. When Maya introduced herself, Viper just nodded and said, "Try to keep up, rookie." And that's how she got her call sign. Not through some heroic act or funny story, just rookie. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it wasn't exactly a confidence booster either. Every time someone said it over the radio, it was a reminder that she was the new kid, the unproven one, the pilot everyone else had to worry about. Maya's roommate was Captain Sarah Chen, one of only 3 other women in the squadron. Sarah had been there for 2 years and had earned everyone's respect the hard way. "Look," Sarah told Maya on her first night, "everyone here is going to be watching you. Every mistake, every hesitation, every time you're not perfect, they'll remember it. It sucks, but that's reality. You have to be twice as good to get half the credit." So fast forward 3 months, and Maya's been flying training missions, doing her time, trying to prove herself. She's good, really good actually, but she's still the rookie. She's got maybe 50 combat hours compared to pilots with 500 or 1,000 for stat. Then comes this mission that's going to change everything. The briefing room was packed that morning. Colonel Martinez stood in front of a map of enemy territory, pointing at various targets and threat locations. "Gentlemen and ladies," he added with a nod to Maya and Sarah, "this is a priority mission. We've got ground forces pinned down about 200 miles into hostile territory. They need supplies, and they need them now. The mission was what they called a CSAR, Combat Search and Rescue Support. There was a transport plane loaded with medical supplies, ammunition, and food that needed to reach the stranded troops. But the airspace was hot, meaning it was crawling with enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile sites. The transport is a sitting duck, Viper said during the briefing. They're big, slow, and loaded with cargo. Without fighter escort, they'll never make it. Colonel Martinez nodded. That's where we come in. 4-ship formation. Viper, you're flight lead. Thompson, you're his wingman. Chen, your element lead for the second pair. He paused and looked at Maya. Rookie, you're flying wing for Chen. Maya felt her stomach drop. Flying wing meant she'd be responsible for protecting Sarah's aircraft while Sarah focused on the primary mission. It was a crucial role, but it was also the position usually given to the least experienced pilot. Everyone in the room knew it. After the briefing, Viper pulled Maya aside. Look, rookie, I know you're eager to prove yourself, but this isn't training. These guys we're going up against? They're not playing around. You stick to your wingman duties, follow orders, and try not to get yourself, or anyone else, killed. Maya wanted to say something back, to defend herself, but what could she say? He was right. She was the rookie. She was unproven. And in a few hours, she'd be flying into combat with people's lives depending on her. The pre-flight routine was something Maya had done hundreds of times, but never for a mission like this. She walked around her F-16, checking every bolt, every panel, every system. These jets were incredible machines. 16,000 pounds of thrust, capable of pulling 9 Gs, armed with air-to-air missiles and a 20mm cannon that could tear another aircraft apart in seconds. But as impressive as the technology was, Maya knew that ultimately it all came down to the pilot, and she was about to find out if she had what it took. Sarah found her during the pre-flight check. You nervous? She asked. Maya wanted to lie, to act tough, but Sarah had been through this before. Terrified, Maya admitted. Sarah smiled. Good. The day you stop being scared is the day you get careless. Just remember your training. Trust your instincts. And whatever happens up there, don't try to be a hero. Heroes get people killed. As Maya climbed into her cockpit, she ran through her mental checklist one more time. Radio check, weapon systems, navigation, emergency procedures. Everything had to be perfect because at 30,000 feet, there's no room for mistakes. The tower gave them clearance, and one by one, the 4 F-16s rolled down the runway. Maya felt that familiar surge of adrenaline as her jet lifted off the ground. No matter how many times she'd done it, takeoff never got old. But this time was different. This time, she was flying into combat. The flight to the mission area took about an hour, and for most of that time, everything was routine. The 4 jets flew in perfect formation, their radar sweeping the sky for threats. Maya stayed glued to Sarah's wing, matching every turn, every climb, every subtle adjustment. But as they got closer to enemy territory, the radio chatter picked up. Air traffic control was tracking multiple bogies, unidentified aircraft that could be enemy fighters. Surface-to-air missile sites were lighting up their radar, trying to get a lock on the American jets. This is where it gets interesting. Viper's voice crackled over the radio. All flights, maintain formation. Stay sharp. Maya could feel her heart rate picking up. Through her canopy, she could see the ground below, endless miles of desert broken up by mountains and valleys where enemy forces could be hiding. Somewhere down there, American soldiers were waiting for the supplies her formation was escorting. That's when the transport plane checked in. Escort flights. This is Big Bird. We're 30 miles behind you, loaded and ready for delivery. Big Bird was a C-130 Hercules, a massive 4-engine cargo plane that could carry tons of supplies, but was about as maneuverable as a flying school bus. Maya had seen them before, but never in a combat situation. The thought of that big, vulnerable aircraft flying into hostile territory made her stomach clench. Copy that, Big Bird, Viper responded. We'll clear the way for you. They were about 50 miles into enemy territory when everything went sideways. Maya was concentrating on maintaining formation when suddenly alarms started blaring in every cockpit simultaneously. "Sam launch! Sam launch!" Thompson's voice was urgent over the radio. "Multiple missiles in the air." Maya looked at her threat display and felt her blood freeze. There were at least 6 surface-to-air missiles climbing toward them, streaking up from hidden positions on the ground. These weren't the old, inaccurate missiles from previous conflicts. These were modern, sophisticated weapons designed specifically to kill aircraft like theirs. "All flights, evasive maneuvers, break formation and climb," Viper ordered. This was the moment Maya had trained for countless times in the simulator, but actually experiencing it was completely different. The G-forces slammed her back into her seat as she pulled her stick back, climbing for altitude while simultaneously turning to avoid the incoming missiles. Fighter jets have countermeasures, chaff and flares designed to confuse incoming missiles. Maya was dropping both, filling the sky with metallic strips and bright flares, trying to give the SAMs something else to lock onto besides her jet. Through her headset, she could hear the other pilots calling out threats, coordinating their evasive maneuvers. "Missile at 2 o'clock. I've got tone on another launcher." Where the hell are they all coming from? Maya managed to avoid the first wave of missiles, but just barely. One SAM passed so close to her aircraft that she could actually see it streak by her canopy, if it had been just a few feet closer. But they weren't out of danger yet. The enemy had revealed their positions by firing, which meant Viper and Thompson could target them with their own missiles. Maya watched as the 2 senior pilots turned their aircraft into attack runs, firing air-to-ground missiles at the SAM sites below. "Splash 1 SAM site," Viper reported. "Thompson, you got the other one?" "Affirmative. Site destroyed." Maya was still trying to process what had just happened when Sarah's voice came over the radio. "Good job, everyone. That was textbook evasion. Rookie, you still with us?" "Still here," Maya replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. But the relief was short-lived, because that's when the real enemy showed up. Multiple bogies, bearing 270, Angels 25. The AWACS controller's voice cut through the radio chatter. AWACS was the airborne early warning aircraft that could see threats from hundreds of miles away. "Count 4, no, make that 6 enemy fighters inbound." Maya's mouth went dry. SAM sites were scary, but enemy fighters were a pilot's worst nightmare. These weren't just missiles fired from the ground. These were other pilots, other trained fighters who wanted to kill them just as much as they wanted to survive. "All flights, this is Viper. We've got company coming. Rookie, Chen, you stay with Big Bird. Thompson and I will engage the fighters." Maya wanted to protest. Every instinct told her she should be in the fight, not hanging back playing defense. But orders were orders, and she was still the rookie. She watched as Viper and Thompson turned toward the incoming enemy aircraft, their jets disappearing into the distance. Meanwhile, the big, lumbering C-130 was still 15 minutes out from the drop zone, completely vulnerable. "Don't worry," Sarah said over a private channel. "Those 2 are the best in the business. They'll handle it." But Maya wasn't so sure. 6 enemy fighters against 2 friendlies? Those weren't great odds, even for pilots as skilled as Viper and Thompson. That's when she heard it, the sound that every fighter pilot dreads, the long, continuous tone that means an enemy missile has locked onto your aircraft. "Maya," Sarah's voice was urgent. "You've got a missile lock. Break right now." Maya yanked her stick to the right, pulling G's so hard that her vision started to tunnel. But she was too late. The enemy had fired a long-range missile, and it was tracking her perfectly. She deployed every countermeasure she had. Chaff, flares, electronic jamming. She pulled her jet through maneuvers that pushed the aircraft to its absolute limits, but the missile kept coming. The explosion, when it came, was like getting hit by a truck while riding a motorcycle. Maya felt the impact through the entire airframe as the missile struck her right wing. The cockpit filled with alarms, warning lights, and the acrid smell of smoke. For a moment, Maya thought she was dead. The jet was spinning, completely out of control. Her instruments were going crazy, showing system failures across the board. Through her headset, she could hear Viper's voice. "Rookie, Rookie, respond, are you hit?" Maya tried to answer, but she couldn't even find her voice. The jet was in what pilots call a death spiral, a flat spin that was almost impossible to recover from. Her training said she should eject immediately, punch out, and hope the rescue helicopters found her before the enemy did. "Eject, Rookie. Get out now." Viper's order was clear and urgent. Maya's hand moved toward the ejection handle. One pull, and she'd be out of the aircraft in seconds, floating down under a parachute. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But then she looked at her instruments again. The right wing was damaged, but the jet was still flying. The engine was running rough, but it was still producing power. And down below, Big Bird was still lumbering toward the drop zone with no fighter escort except Sarah. This is where Maya's story gets really incredible. Because instead of following orders, instead of doing the safe thing that every manual and every instructor had drilled into her head, she made a choice that nobody expected. She ignored the ejection order. Negative on the ejection. Maya radioed back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Aircraft is still flyable." There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio. Then Viper's voice, filled with disbelief. "Rookie, that's not a request. That's an order. Eject now." But Maya was already working the problem. In the simulator, she'd practiced emergency procedures hundreds of times. She knew that the F-16 was designed to fly, even with significant damage. The question was whether she could control it well enough to be useful. She carefully moved the stick, testing the aircraft's response. The jet was sluggish and wanted to roll to the right because of the wing damage, but it was responding to her inputs. She adjusted the trim, redistributed hydraulic pressure, and slowly, very slowly, brought the aircraft back under control. "Maya, what are you doing?" Sarah's voice was tight with concern. "My job," Maya replied. What she didn't tell Sarah, what she couldn't tell anyone at that moment, was that she'd spotted something on her radar that made her blood run cold. More enemy fighters were closing in on their position, and they were specifically targeting Big Bird. The transport plane was 15 minutes from the drop zone, loaded with supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers on the ground. If Maya bailed out now, Sarah would be alone against multiple enemy fighters. The odds of the mission succeeding would drop to almost zero. So, Maya made the hardest decision of her life. She was going to stay in the fight. Flying a damaged fighter jet is like trying to drive a car with 2 flat tires and a bent steering wheel. Everything takes more effort. Nothing responds the way it should. And you're constantly fighting the aircraft just to maintain control. Maya's F-16 wanted to roll right because of the wing damage. The engine was running hot because debris had damaged some of the cooling systems. And worst of all, her radar was intermittent, giving her only occasional glimpses of what was happening around her. But she stayed in formation with Sarah, matching the other pilots' movements as best she could. To anyone watching from the ground, it probably looked like 2 jets flying in perfect harmony. They couldn't see Maya's white-knuckle grip on the stick or the sweat pouring down her face inside her helmet. "Rookie, I don't know what you're thinking, but you need to head home," Sarah said over their private channel. "I'm thinking those fighters are about to turn Big Bird into scrap metal if we don't stop them," Maya replied. And she was right. On her intermittent radar, Maya could see the enemy aircraft converging on the transport plane. Big Bird was still 10 minutes from the drop zone, flying straight and level, completely defenseless. That's when Maya spotted it. Another missile launch. This one aimed directly at Sarah's aircraft. What happened next is the kind of thing that gets written about in aviation magazines and told in pilot training schools for decades. Maya saw the missile tracking towards Sarah's jet, and in that split second, she had to make another impossible choice. She could warn Sarah and hope her squadron mate could evade the missile. That was the textbook response, the safe play. But Maya's damaged radar was giving her information that Sarah's systems might not have picked up yet. By the time Sarah realized she was being targeted, it might be too late. Or Maya could do something that had never been attempted in combat before. She could deliberately intercept the missile with her own aircraft. "Sarah, brake left now!" Maya shouted into her radio while simultaneously rolling her damaged jet into the path of the incoming missile. Sarah reacted instantly, pulling her F-16 into a hard left turn just as Maya's aircraft crossed between her and the missile. Maya deployed every flare and chaff cartridge she had left, turning her jet into a mobile fireworks display. The missile, confused by all the countermeasures and Maya's sudden appearance, lost its lock on Sarah and began tracking Maya instead, which was exactly what Maya had hoped for and exactly what she had feared. Now she had an enemy missile chasing her damaged aircraft, and she had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to survive. This is where Maya's endless hours in the simulator finally paid off. She'd practiced emergency procedures until she could do them in her sleep, and now her life depended on that training. The missile was closing fast, but Maya's damaged F-16 had one advantage. It wasn't flying like a normal aircraft anymore. The wing damage was actually causing random, unpredictable movements that made her harder to track. Maya used this to her advantage, deliberately putting the jet into a controlled tumble that sent her diving toward the ground while spinning like a corkscrew. It was insanely dangerous. One wrong move and she'd lose control completely. But it was also completely unpredictable. The missile, designed to track smooth, predictable flight paths, couldn't adjust fast enough to Maya's chaotic movements. It streaked past her aircraft and exploded harmlessly in the distance. Maya pulled out of the dive with maybe 2,000 feet to spare, her jet still smoking but still flying. On the radio, she could hear Sarah's voice, filled with disbelief. "Maya, how the hell did you just do that?" But there wasn't time to celebrate, because now the enemy fighters had realized that the Americans weren't going to go down easy, and they were closing in for a final attack. What followed was the most intense 10 minutes of aerial combat Maya would ever experience. With Viper and Thompson still engaged with the main group of enemy fighters, Maya and Sarah found themselves alone against 3 enemy aircraft that were determined to stop Big Bird from reaching the drop zone. Maya's jet was barely holding together, but she refused to give up. When an enemy fighter lined up on Sarah's tail, Maya managed to get behind him and fire one of her remaining missiles. When another enemy tried to attack Big Bird directly, Maya put herself between the transport and the fighter, forcing the enemy to engage her instead. She was flying on pure instinct now, every lesson from flight school and every hour in the simulator combining into a kind of aerial ballet. Her damaged F-16 was an unlikely dance partner, but somehow they made it work. The turning point came when Viper and Thompson finished off their opponents and rejoined the fight. Suddenly, the odds shifted from 3 against 2 to 4 against 3, and the enemy fighters found themselves outnumbered. Within minutes, it was over. The last enemy fighter was either shot down or had fled the area. Big Bird continued on to the drop zone and successfully delivered the supplies to the stranded ground forces. And Maya's shot-up F-16 was still flying. The flight back to base was the longest hour of Maya's life. Her jet was held together by willpower and prayer, leaking fuel and hydraulic fluid, with an engine that sounded like it was about to give up at any moment. But she made it. When the runway finally appeared ahead of her, Maya had never seen anything so beautiful. She lined up for approach, fighting the aircraft's tendency to roll right, and somehow managed to get the jet on the ground in one piece. As soon as she shut down the engine, Maya was surrounded by ground crew, mechanics, and medical personnel. Everyone wanted to see the jet that had been hit by a missile and kept flying, piloted by the rookie who had refused to eject. When Maya finally climbed out of the cockpit, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Sarah was there waiting for her, and the look on her face said everything. "You saved my life up there," Sarah said simply. But Maya was looking past her, to where Viper was walking across the tarmac. The squadron's golden boy, the pilot everyone respected, was coming straight toward her. Maya expected a lecture about following orders, about the risks she'd taken, about how she'd endangered the mission by staying in a damaged aircraft. Instead, Viper stopped in front of her, looked her in the eye, and said, "That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen. Welcome to the squadron." Word of Maya's mission spread through the base like wildfire. The rookie who everyone had doubted had not only survived a missile strike, but had stayed in the fight and helped save the mission. The story got better every time it was told, and every version was true. Within a week, Maya's call sign changed. She wasn't Rookie anymore. The squadron started calling her Phoenix because, like the mythical bird, she'd risen from the ashes when everyone thought she was finished. The official after-action report credited Maya with saving Sarah's life, protecting the transport aircraft, and showing exceptional courage under fire. But for Maya, the real victory was simpler than that. She'd proven to herself that she belonged. Colonel Martinez called her into his office a few days later. "I've been flying for 25 years," he told her, "and I've never seen a pilot do what you did up there. That intercept maneuver, that recovery from the missile hit, they're going to be teaching that in flight school." Maya smiled. "Just doing my job, sir." "Your job was to eject when your aircraft was hit," Martinez replied. "What you did was way beyond your job, and that's what made the difference." Maya Brooks went on to fly dozens more combat missions, eventually becoming one of the most respected pilots in her squadron. She never forgot that day when everything changed, when she stopped being the rookie and became the pilot who would do anything to bring her team home safe. And every time a new pilot joined the squadron, feeling nervous and unproven, Maya would tell them the same thing Sarah had told her. "The day you stop being scared is the day you get careless. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and never give up." Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next incredible story of courage in the skies.